Well, it's a real pleasure to be here. When I was preparing for this talk, I realized I was totally out of my comfort zone, as I'm so used to speaking to a room full of doctors using medical jargon in a totally different language. So I had to rethink. So if I do use any jargon, please forgive me, and I will explain it afterwards if I do. Now, one of the problems with talking about something that has a sexy name like CyberKnife is that we get problems with patient perception and more problems with media perception. So this is some of the things that I hope there's no one from the Mail online in the room, but these are the sort of the nemesis things that I have to live with when patients come in and they expect that, in fact, what I have available is something that's truly magical and it will cure their cancer, cause them no harm, and that they will not even never know they had a problem. And unfortunately, that's not true. And before I really get to what CyberKnife is, I realize I probably have to explain to you a little bit about what radiotherapy is. Because really, radiotherapy, we talk a lot about photons and protons. These are particles that we use. And it's all pretty Star Trek-y. And our surgical colleagues kind of look at us as the sort of dark side because it's poorly understood and it's ever so slightly magical. But really, it isn't Star Trek. It is a radiation-based treatment. And very briefly, why radiotherapy works. Essentially, we use high-energy X-rays, and the X-rays penetrate tissue. As you heard from Sulin, X-rays are dangerous. They do cause harm, so we do try and avoid them, but they're actually very effective at killing cancer cells. The higher the energy of the particle we use, the deeper it will penetrate. So the concept is that the skin will get a lower dose than the tissue underneath it, so we want the X-rays to go in, deposit its energy underneath the surface, and therefore if we build up multiple fields, we can give a high dose where we want it with the tumor, and I'll show you a bit more of this in a second, trying to avoid dose to the tissue we don't want to treat. So essentially, mathematically, it looks like that. There's a dose response. As you go deeper, the maximum dose is deposited under the surface, and the dose falls off. But as you can see, even deep in the tissue, we might be getting radiation where we don't want it. And we look at that a bit more schematically. You can see that this is a radiation machine. This is the dose in the tissue. This is the patient's lungs. We might be trying, so we're getting a lot of dose deposited here, a lot less dose there, but there's more dose beyond potentially where we want to treat. So schematically, that's what happens to radiation as it goes into the body. And when it gets into the cell, you'll all have heard of something called DNA. This is our genetic makeup. It's formed of double strands of protein, essentially. And our entire life is coded by 4 genetic molecules, and it's in DNA. Now, if you break the strands of DNA, the cell has ways of trying to repair it. But if you cause a double strand break, so if you cause a single strand break, our cells are very ingenious and they can repair DNA. They can also, to a degree, repair double strand breaks, but much more difficult to do. And what radiation does is it causes double strand breaks in DNA. So it causes the cell to die because it cannot repair the genetic damage. So what happens to a patient? They have a scan. Then we take a picture of the patient, essentially. We have a target inside, which we outline. And then we create a radiation plan, something that looks like that. This is one beam of radiation on each side of the patient. So one beam from the front, one beam from the side, one beam from the other side. The dose is deposited in the middle. You can see in this case it's a sort of square field of dose. The target might be in the middle, and you can see that these surrounding areas, as well as the target, which in this case is a prostate, the bladder up here, the rectum at the back, they're also getting a dose of radiation, which we don't really want, but this is how we've developed treatment over the years. This is a more old-fashioned treatment, but I will show you how things have evolved. This is a standard radiation machine. It's called a linear accelerator. It moves in one plane generally around the body with the patient lying on a couch. So this is the kind of thing that we've done over time. So this is our target. Now, in things in medicine, they're not always round and symmetrical and easy to treat. They're often, this could be the cancer, and it's inside the area is an organ at risk. So we don't want to treat this organ, we want to treat this cancer. So we can do this by putting one field on, but blocking the dose in the middle of the field and only letting the dose come out on the sides. And it looks something like that. And then we keep building fields around. And all of these fields will have ways of being shaped, and I'll show you how we do that in a second, to try and conform the dose to this awkward shaped target and try and avoid the dose. Obviously, this is very schematic. And this is done by something called a multi-leaf collimator, which is in the head of the machine as the radiation comes out. These lead leaves move in and out of the beam. They do it in a complex computer algorithm now to try and shape the dose. And physicists love playing with these technologies, and we actually took an X-ray, our research physicists took an X-ray film, and they painted the Mona Lisa, obviously in black and white, onto an X-ray film. It's a really impressive picture, but you can paint pictures with this technology. Essentially, that's the difference. That's a flat beam, or just a beam that's been shaped on the sides, and this is a beam that's been modulated by lead coming in and out of it, and that means you're getting different dose deposits. So radiation treatment has evolved significantly, and it's allowed us to paint these kind of pictures. So this blue area is the area we want to treat. Happens to be some lymph nodes. This is the bladder, and this is the rectum we want to avoid. And we can do these complex shapes now and try and deliver radiation to as much of the cancer as possible, avoiding the normal tissue. Now, we can't avoid normal tissue completely, and that's why radiation still has side effects, but we can do a lot better than we used to be able to do. So what about the CyberKnife, this sexy piece of kit? Well, the first thing, what is it not? It's not a knife, okay? So it has nothing surgical at all. It's a radiation machine. So it's not a knife. It's also not a lightsaber. It's closer to a lightsaber than a knife, but it's not a lightsaber, and it's not a laser. What it is a radiotherapy machine, like that big machine I showed you earlier, a linear accelerator, but it's mounted on a robot, okay? And the robot is exactly the same as the robots that are manufacturing our cars, and it was very clearly demonstrated in the old Citroen ad where you saw the dancing robot. It's the same robot. And why is this useful? Because what we want is something that can target the tumor. So you want accuracy. If we could hit the bullseye every time and avoid the other numbers on the dartboard, that's what we're aiming for. And the challenge really is that inside our body, things aren't always static. They don't just lie still. A prostate or a lung cancer, as we breathe, the cancer will move. If it's in the abdomen, as you've got bowel movements, your cancer will move. If it's in the prostate, as your bladder fills or your bowel gas changes, your prostate moves. So all the targets that we want to try and hit might be moving. And they don't just move up and down. They might move in all different planes. And for instance, the prostate cancer, it moves in all these different planes, a bit like a plane. It pitches, it yaws, and it rolls. So we have to be able to account for motion in all these planes if we want to be extremely accurate. So standardly, what we've done is we just outline the target, and we put a centimeter or so around that to allow for that motion. So if it moves, we'll still hit it, but we also have to hit the surrounding tissue. If you only want to put, say, a millimeter or two around it, to account for motion, you've got to be much more accurate. You've got to track this motion. And that's what this machine does. So this is the machine. This is the linear accelerator. So a much smaller radiation machine mounted in here. And this is the robot. And these are X-ray. These are not treatment X-rays. These are diagnostic X-rays. They take pictures so we can see where the target is. And this is a light detecting source. So for things that move, we have light detectors on the patient's chest, and we can monitor the breathing. And as all these technologies are integrated together to allow for the machine to track the target and only treat whilst the target's in its path. Okay, so this will hopefully demonstrate how the machine works. So you can see the robot moves. On the patient is a vest with markers that these emit light, and that light detecting source, as you can see there, it monitors the rate of breathing and creates a breathing model. You can see that the head of the linear accelerator, the robot, is moving in synchrony with the patient's breathing. So once that model is created, the robot will track the breathing pattern using the light-emitting sources, and these X-ray units are taking a picture of the patient, and the inside, they can either see the tumor if it's visible, or we put little metal markers close to the tumor so it can be detected. And all that data is fed back to a computer, and the robot will only treat when the cancer's in its path. So this is an example. This is a PET scan. I won't bore you with the details of it. You can see we've made it nice and easy. It's orange. That's the cancer. That's the bad bit. These are the bones of the pelvis, bowel in front. Now this is a recurrent cancer, someone who had a previously treated prostate cancer who recurred a number of years later with a lymph node. in an awkward site behind large blood vessels, very difficult to surgically remove. So we outlined it, that's where it is. And we created a treatment plan. So each one of these cones represents a beam of radiation. And that allows a very, very tight dose. This is a bit like a contour map on an ordnance survey map. The closer together the lines are, the closer the dose is. So a very high dose given at the cancer. And as we move away from the tumor, there's a lot less dose given to the surrounding areas. So we can, what this means is that standardly with radiotherapy, because we couldn't do this, we had to give very small doses per day and stretch the radiation over a long period of time. So you would have to give, say, 2 gray and treat it over 7 weeks. Now we can treat this in large fractions, 10 gray a day, and treat it in 3 days. So it totally changes the whole time scale of the treatment. And that's what I call the hedgehog. So the cancer in here, we've removed all the soft tissue, and again, each one of those lines represents a radiation beam. And if we compare this to what I showed you earlier, with the 3 fields of a traditional radiation or more old-fashioned radiation treatment, it's a totally different concept. This is about 180 beams, very, very focused, small beams, very hot dose in the middle, and a rapid dose fall-off around the area. So it's already pretty much a standard practice to use this kind of technology. It's not just CyberKnife in lung cancer, but prostate cancer is one of our big challenges. So for the men in the room, this is our major lifetime risk as a cancer. Unfortunately, it's the most common male cancer. And we have about 40,000 new cases of prostate cancer in the UK every year. And this technology offers us an ability to treat this extremely accurately. This is the prostate. We get very, very tight dose, trying to bend the dose away from the rectum to try and minimize the side effects of treatment. And again, that's the kind of thing it looks like with our hedgehog, and trying to target the tumor in the prostate and avoiding the dose to the organs we don't want. But there are 2 big questions. People say, well, why don't we just do this routinely? Well, we have to test things in medicine. We have to evaluate whether they truly are as good as the normal treatment. So currently, as you saw, this is the Da Vinci robot. It's not actually a robot at all. It's a puppet. As it says, it's a master slave. It's a brilliant piece of kit, but the surgeon controls it from remotely, a bit like a games console. And then this is the CyberKnife robot. So we're asking the question, this is one very standard way of treating prostate cancer, but is this as good? And the only way to test this is to compare them. And the other major question is standard radiotherapy, which is given over 7.5 or 8 weeks, which is a very tried and tested method of treating prostate cancer. Well, can we do it better and faster? Can we do it in 5 days using this more modern therapy? So these 2 questions are being tested in a randomized clinical trial of which I'm the chief investigator. So we have 2 studies running. One is the surgical comparison, one is the radiotherapy comparison. So we have about 220 patients have already randomized in this. We're about to open another 20 centers in the UK, 11 centers in Canada, and about 10 more in Europe. So these things take time, unfortunately. The study will take a number of years to complete, but it will tell us definitively whether these new technologies are as good as the current gold standards. And hopefully, if we do show, then we will have a new standard of care for prostate cancer and many other tumor types in the NHS. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me ask you both one question. I'll open it to the audience. I'm kind of conscious of time. We've heard that actually these things do take time. Robotic surgery, I think, started in about 1985. In terms of the biggest barriers to accelerate things, is it legal, ethical, regulatory, cost? What do you both see as the biggest impediments to the pace of change?
All of that. Regulatory, at least from my point of view, in terms of as the technical innovator, yes, regulatory is a big one. And to get through that, then there's the costs of that and the time it takes to go through all the testing. So I'd say all of that, all together in one.
Yeah, I think it's very different depending on the healthcare system in which you work. So if you're in a profit-driven commercial healthcare sector like the US, they very much have these bump and falls. So they have a new technology adopted pretty often very quickly. Some work, and then they become standard of care. Many fail, but they have a huge excitement, massive investment, often great disappointment. Then you have NHS England, which is probably the complete opposite of that. Very, very, very slow. So we are very slow adopters of technology in this country. But actually, when we do adopt it, tend to do it rigorously and test it properly. And so there are advantages and disadvantages. And I think somewhere between those two is probably where we want to be. I would like to see us accelerate our way we adopt technology, but equally I don't think we should adopt the US model of just trying something because it looks right, and actually you can make a lot of money out of it quickly. That in healthcare is a dangerous way. We should test things properly, but we need to commit to do it more quickly.
Thank you. So let's take a couple of questions from the floor, and then we'll move on to the next session. Lady in the front.
In this world of innovation and robotic surgery, it seems to be a battleground for commercial interests and big ideas. How do you ensure, since it affects so many lives, how do you ensure that there is a minimum mistake profile?
Do you want to answer that?
No.
I mean, I think by testing things properly in clinical trials, you have a way of eliminating mistakes. With robotic surgery, we know for certain there is a learning curve for an individual surgeon, and every surgeon who trains on this technique has to go through a learning curve. A lot of that can now be done in simulatory environments so that you're not actually operating on real patients, but you still, at some point, you have to operate on real patients, and there is always going to be a learning curve. So there's safety in training, and then for technologies like mine, it's evaluating them in clinical trials that should test whether they are safe. And
I think that question really comes to the fore when you're talking about things like autonomous robotics. So this is something actually Lord Kekar and I discussed actually before the actual session. He asked me, do I think that we're at that stage yet? And I think we're very far from that stage. Partially because, no offense meant, but I do find actually a lot of clinicians are very hesitant to actually adopt that technology and to kind of give up the control. But I do feel there is a place for the surgeon. There always will be a place for the surgeon. They're the ones with the experience. They're the ones with the knowledge. And it's not always possible to program these robots with all that knowledge.
I was wondering, I didn't really discuss about this, but transplantable 3D printed organs have been around for a couple of years. I was wondering if we look ahead when they would perhaps be commercially available or more normal.
totally out of my comfort zone, I'm afraid. I couldn't tell you.
I'm aware of some of the 3D printed technologies. There's a company in Belgium, Materialize, who's very much doing a lot of this. I'm not sure about organs, though. I know about bones and skull plates and whatnot, and those can all be customized and personalized, which is really the way I think medicine is going to go. Some of it's already available. I mean, I don't know what you mean by commercial, as in, off the shelf, here's my brain, here's my, my new kidney, but I mean, a lot of these can be personalized now.
One more, final one for you.
What are the primary and secondary endpoints of this CyberKnife study?
So the primary endpoint is disease control at 5 years, and the secondary endpoints there are about 20, of which overall survival, disease-free survival, but they're predominantly toxicity endpoints. So comparing patient-reported quality of life, so it's things like bladder function, rectal function, sexual function, are all being recorded at baseline and at all time points in the study. And it's designed as something called a non-inferiority study, which means that we expect the treatments to end up being equivalent for disease control. And in fact, we do very well at this end of the disease in controlling and curing it already. So we don't expect a big difference. What we expect is a big difference in quality of life. And costs, yeah. Costs are very difficult to do in an international study because the costs are very different in different healthcare systems. So although we've tried to work in a cost-effective endpoint, it's very difficult to do that across multiple healthcare systems.
Thank you. Unfortunately, in the interest of time, we need to move to the next panel. I'll ask Jason Channel to host the New Energy Technologies and ask our panel. Thank you, our panelists, for their time today.